A few years back, Netflix and Warner Brothers conspired to inflict a live-action Fullmetal Alchemist movie upon the world that, unsurprisingly, butchered the source material beyond recognition, ironically by trying way too hard to replicate its most recognizable moments and nothing else. Well, this may shock you, especially if you saw it or my video about it, but somehow that thing got a sequel. Well, two sequels, actually, but only one of them's out right now. Fullmetal Alchemist: The Revenge of Scar. A title that raises many questions, such as, who is Scar if you're a movie-only FMA fan, since they completely cut him from the last one? And if you're not a movie-only FMA fan, so that's 100% of FMA fans I'm addressing now, then that fact alone will have you very worried for this movie's storyline, which is very warranted, but trust me, you have no idea how worried you should really be. You will, though, because I did the thing where I watched the thing, so you don't have to, and now I'm gonna tell you about it. But before I do, real quick, I want to tell you about two sales that Bookwalker, Kadokawa's official ebook store, has going on until September 1st. Firstly, tabletop gaming otaku can get 50% off the new Goblin Slayer TRPG and off the slightly less new Konosuba TRPG. So if you want to have a goofy and/or grimdark adventure with your otaku friends, you should really check that out. On the other hand, if you don't have friends and need a voice to fill the lonely void, Bookwalker also now sells audiobook versions of some of their top-rated light novels, including Overlord, 86, and SAO, with narration by the English dub actors for their respective leads. So now you can have Kraft Lawrence himself read Spice and Wolf to you. The first volumes of all those series are going for 50% off too, with second volumes 30% off. And remember, new users can use the promo code BASEMENT to get an additional 600 yen off any of those deals or anything else on the Bookwalker store, where new deals are always popping up year-round. Links to both promos in the doobly-doo. Okay, now I can tell you about the movie. And the first impression that it creates isn't that bad, actually. We're introduced to Scar through a fairly faithful and quick recreation of his late-night bridge-top duel with the dapperly haberdashed Silver Alchemist, and the fight itself is pretty well done. The CGI is still on the janky and cheap side, but the camera work and editing are a fair bit more competent this go-round, for now, and the choreography is comprehensible, at least. A couple shots are really good, even. If this fight was uploaded to YouTube as a cosplay fan film, I'd probably give it a like. And even as an opening to a professionally made movie, well, it sets expectations pretty low for the effects, which, as you'll see, the movie still manages to fall well short of, but it also sets a clear and consistent tone, tells a tight, self-contained story, and builds a bit of hype, which is more than I can say for the last one's speed run through the death and resurrection of Trisha Elric. In keeping with the fundamentals of action movie pacing, it serves as an exciting little dollop of intensity to give us an idea of how intense the film is gonna get, eventually, before it settles into a more relaxed rhythm for the real introduction to its heroes and story. An introduction in which they stop a train hijacking while also kung fu fighting off a bunch of unrelated ninjas whom they just met, plus a homunculus who showed up out of nowhere, culminating in a huge explosion that takes out the train's brakes, so Ed has to stop it from crashing into Central Station with alchemy in the lamest way imaginable, which doesn't even make physical sense. All in the space of about 8 minutes, with roughly 3 minutes of dialogue sandwiched between it and the last fight to give us a Cliff's Notes version of the anime's introduction to Ling, Fu, and Lanfan. A story which, for some reason, they've chosen to combine with the train-jacking plotline from Chapter 4 of the manga, and then also squeeze in a contrived moment where Ed almost falls off the train so Envy can show up to save him and dump some exposition about sacrifices, so it's kinda sorta justified when he comes up with the plan to trap Gluttony 40 minutes later. And I will admit, the bit where Envy pretends to be Hughes did kinda get both me and Yazzie for a second there, but only because we genuinely couldn't remember if the last movie had killed him off yet. So, no. Conventionally good narrative pacing does not seem to be a priority here. Once again, the film's goal is self-evidently to make its audience go, "Yay, I recognize that," as many times as humanly possible in the space of 2 hours, with zero regard for how any of those events or images connect together logically, which is super frustrating to see in one FMA movie, let alone 2 in a row, because the careful construction of the manga's plot is probably the single most satisfying thing about it. At least the first time through. Once you know the mystery, it's more the characters that carry it. But I guess Warner Brothers Japan figured it was more economical to just milk a few nostalgia bucks out of existing fans instead of treating this new retelling of the now decade-old classic story as a potential new introduction for a new generation. And hey, it works for Disney, but Disney is generally working with, movies when they make their lazy live-action remake movies, not long-form serialized animated storylines with many precisely placed moving parts. With the Disney model, you take an old beat-up engine and put it in a shiny new chassis that may not really suit it, but at least looks good on a poster. What Warner Bros. Is trying to do with these movies is more like taking an entire jet engine apart, stuffing a bunch of semi-random bits from it under the hood of a truck, and just sorta hoping it'll go. Well, we saw how it went last time, which covered... Actually, I'll let past Geoff handle this, because I barely even remember it anymore.
In 2 hours and 15 minutes, Full Metal Alchemist covers, in this order, which is not the canon order, Ed and Al's origin story, the Lior incident, the Sho Tucker arc, the search for Dr. Marco, Al's existential crisis, the murder of Maze Hughes, the assault on the Fifth Laboratory, the homunculus zombie army, zomunculi, I guess, and the death of Lust.
If I recall correctly, the way they decided to tie all those very disconnected bits of story together without using any of the important villains that they might want for the sequels, or bury the Chopper because he was out of their CGI budget, was to turn Sho Tucker and Hakuro, the random Amestrian general who the dude with the gun arm hijacked that train to kill in Chapter 4, into the central antagonists of the whole movie. Which, repurposing a character most fans won't even recognize is one way to keep your surprise big bad surprising, but it really wasn't hard for the sequel to do better than that, or at least more marketable. Most of the semi-random bits in Fullmetal Alchemist 2, The Revenge of Scar, have been taken, as you might guess, from Scar's character arc, which, as you might remember, was sort of an ongoing thing that ran throughout, the whole anime. Well, not anymore. Now there's barely 30 minutes between him and Ed's meet cute and him and Winry's meet shoot. The whole point of Scar's character in the original manga was to serve as a legitimately dangerous recurring threat that could thread together the Elric's early episodic adventures while we're still waiting for the big bad to reveal himself and take on that role. And after he does, the story of Scar's life on the Lam and eventual redemption helps to connect the meandering, mystery-focused front end of the series to its snowballing, conflict-driven back half. Scar almost always shows up alongside, or in some cases against, other villains as a complicating factor in their conflicts with the Elrics, rather than making his conflict with them the focus. He's simply not the sort of villain who can carry a film by himself. Hell, he's not really a villain at all, more of a sympathetic antagonist turned brooding anti-hero. In a more conventional shonen, he'd have been Ed's rival. In my opinion, this movie really should have been about Kimberly, with Scar serving in a supporting role, but to do that, they would have had to put him in the first one first, and subplots like Scar's are the first thing you cut when you don't know if you'll get a sequel, so you're trying and failing to make one self-contained movie out of 2 entire seasons of television, even if basically every scene in that subplot is essential to the overarching story. So then, when you do get a pair of sequels to wrap up that story, that suddenly leaves you with no other option than to cram it all into the interquel so the finale can focus on Father, whose entire storyline that also spanned the entire manga, will have to be crammed into that movie because this one's already too full of Scar shit. This does at least make the movie feel a bit more cohesive than the last one, in that all of the semi-random bits that have been crammed into it are mostly related to Scar, the war in Ishval, or the royal visitors from Jing, with just a smidge of the homunculus conspiracy mixed in to set up the final act and sequel. But when I say cohesive, I mean it in a purely aesthetic sense, because all of those plot points were originally separated by weeks or even months of other shit going on in the anime and connected by complex chains of events that this movie definitely doesn't have the time to show. So the justifications for moving the characters between those plot points are virtually non-existent. Like, even the setup for Ed's first fight with Scar. So Mustang pulls him in from the station to warn him there's a serial killer on the loose and assign guards to him. Then he and Al immediately run away from those guards and accidentally step on May, who's like 30 now, so they have to buy her lunch. Then she calls Ed short, so he gets hilariously mad. Then he chases her over to the one set that they have for literally every street scene in Central, where, oh no, it's Scar! Or a Twinkie J-Rocker in arguably brownface cosplaying as Scar. Run away! Oh crap, his hand can make stock rubble effects come out of the wall, and it turned Al into polygons! Aw, geez, he's got Ed's arm now, and it's wet so Roy can't do the Roy thing. Who will save us?
Just try it!
Ugh. Ugh. Is that supposed to be Armstrong? He looks like a veiny pumpkin. Hey, is, not being saved an option? 'Cause I think I'd rather die than look at you, thanks. But wait! Check out the even uglier CGI that's been passed down the Armstrong family line for generations! And if you could ignore how bad those angular rock PNGs look for a sec, you might notice the massive masking outline around his hand here. I have legitimately seen cleaner effects work than this in fan-made YouTube videos a decade ago. How bad was the crunch for this VFX team? I hope using all them stock brick and particle simulations for everything Scar does helped with that, I guess. Or maybe they just put most of their time and money into animating Ed. He does look a lot better this go-round. I could have sworn he was a tokusatsu actor in a suit in a couple places. Huh. Can't really figure out a good way to segue back from this to talking about the bad writing. But this movie doesn't give a shit about connecting its ideas, so why should I? You might remember from the last film, but probably don't, that even though they did put Maria Ross in it, she didn't actually do any Maria Ross stuff. Mustang was framed for Hugh's murder instead, so she never had to be fake murdered, which also means that she never had to go into hiding in the desert. But that's a bit of a problem, because going out into the desert to meet her is how Ed, 1, discovers the bottom half of the Xerxes transmutation circle, and 2, meets the Ishvalan refugees who saw Scar murder the Rock Bells, both of which are pretty fucking important plot points to hit, especially the one about Scar in the Scar movie, since most of his character arc can't happen without it. So now they've got to invent some whole new reason for Ed to be out in the desert. Or so you'd think. You'd think that a person would need a reason to go to literally the middle of nowhere in one of the harshest climates imaginable, but nope. When Ed gets home to Risenbull to get his arm repaired after Scar breaks it, Hohenheim's there, and on the way out, he's like, "Yo, Pinako, you know what happened to Xerxes? It could happen here, too. Watch out." And then Pinako's like, "Nothing in Xerxes but ruins now." And Ed's like, "I bet." So then he walks across the entire desert by himself. Really? That's the whole reason. Then he gets accosted by the Ishvalan exposition gang, who deliver some very good exposition with very good delivery.
During the rebellion, we were very lucky. A Mestrian doctor saved both Eldashan and I. We're only alive today because they rescued us.
Great work, dub director's kid. no notes. While Ed is doing that, Winry finds that missing bolt that she forgot to put in his arm that one time, which now doesn't really do anything because we're already well past the 5th laboratory fight where his arm was supposed to be broken because of it. So instead, it's sort of just a MacGuffin to make her chase him to Central so she can arrive just in time to hear him confront Scar about the rock bells. Even though she really should have arrived well before him because he just spent at least a couple days walking through the desert to get that information, while there was a serial killer on the loose. Plus, by the time she gets there, he's been in Central for at least one more day, in which he ran into Salim and Führer King Bradley in front of an embarrassing green screen effect, and then spent the night getting eavesdropped on by Ling as he and Al concoct their plan to use Scar to lure out the homunculi. A plan which doesn't involve Roy Mustang's crew at all in this version of the story, but Hawkeye still rolls up in a Jeep at the end to shoot Scar in the leg and cart Gluttony off because that's how it happened in the anime, and the screenwriter couldn't be bothered to come up with a new way to end the scene. Now, I'm pretty sure the film's half-assed justification for this is that Ed brought Winry back to base after she confronted Scar, and then she immediately asked Mustang and his crew for help, but if my math is right, that means that this one missing bolt causes over a third of this movie's plot. I guess I'm getting a bit ahead of myself by jumping into that without talking about Winry pointing the gun at Scar or Ling and Lanfan's fight with the homunculi first, but there really isn't that much to say about those parts of the movie if you've already seen the anime. They play out pretty much the exact same way, only with real actors, worse pacing, and way worse effects, with pretty much all of the absolute worst effects having been applied to Gluttony for some reason. It almost feels like a running gag that every single time Gluttony does anything or gets attacked, it looks like complete ass. Well, okay, the effect where they tie him up in a ball doesn't look half bad, but that's about the best I can say for his appearance in this film. If this fight was a cosplay fan film on YouTube, I probably wouldn't leave a like, but I don't think I'd dislike it either. Now, when they get back to the Doc's place and Ed asks Hawkeye for an Ishval flashback, that's an FMA fan film I'd hit dislike on.
Is it just me? Or is this genocide campaign way too risky?
The whole Ishval sequence is just atrocious. I mean, holy shit. Ishval itself looks like a CSGO map for all of the 2 seconds we get to see it intact, for starters, but I don't want to harp on the CGI when the writing is so much worse. This one 10-minute sequence takes pretty much all of the intense and emotional Ishval flashbacks that the anime had teased out over like half its entire runtime, removes everything from them that isn't exposition, and mashes them all together into one massive dump, including the scenes about Scar for some reason, even though it's supposed to be Hawkeye's flashback. What's really weird is there's a bunch of hooks scattered throughout the movie where they clearly intended to insert these flashbacks, like when Scar has a bad dream, or Armstrong does a real bad job of pretending to have PTSD shakes. But I guess test audiences must have gotten bored with those because we only see tiny fragments of what happened in the past until it's time to hit us with it all at once. Which creates a ton of problems for the story if you don't know what's supposed to happen in the anime already. Like when Scar holds back on killing Ed because he reminds him of his brother, but that's the first time in the whole movie that we've seen his brother, so we have no idea who he is or what that shot means. Just like these filmmakers have no idea what storytelling is. Well, okay, I can't entirely blame them for quietly shoving all this flashback shit into the back half of the film because, oh boy, it sure ain't good cinema. Man, these edibles ain't shit.
What is going on?
But it does effectively create this 10-minute wall of borderline unwatchable exposition that I think will stop a good 90% of viewers from ever seeing this film's finale. And part of me thinks they might have done that on purpose because oh boy, does this ending stink. Instead of having Gluttony break out and wreck shit immediately after he's captured, like he does in the anime, the movie cuts to the next day, where Al is just sort of randomly walking around town with the little panda thing when he suddenly runs into May and follows her back to where Scar is hiding, which isn't in the sewers leading down to Father, but rather in the old mine building from up north near Briggs, which has been conveniently relocated right next to Central so they can quickly bang out the last beat of his character arc before the credits roll. The scene plays out roughly the same as it did at Briggs, with Ed and Al working together to pin the serial killer to a piece of rubble, where Winry is then able to confront and forgive him once and for all, which then causes the glowing gold ghosts of her parents to show up and nod approvingly, which feels kind of happy science-y, if I'm being honest, especially when it's immediately preceded by Scar's brother saying this:
When negative thoughts gather, the world will be covered in negativity. But also, we can gather positive thoughts and cover the world in positivity.
But it's what follows that happy science moment that makes this finale really special. Because all of a sudden, Ling runs out like, "Oh shit, you guys, Gluttony broke out!" And then they play a sound effect of a wall breaking and cut to Gluttony standing there, which I guess means this mine building is also right next to the Doc's place? Either that, or he waddled all the way across Central just to find Mustang. Anyway, they fight a bit, Scar gets away, so they decide to take it outside. Then a PS2 game horse that turns out to be Envy shows up to stop Gluttony from eating Ed, which directly results in Ed being eaten by Gluttony, along with Ling and Envy. Then the film just sort of ends on a cliffhanger, with all of them stuck inside Gluttony's false portal of truth, waiting for Father to let them out at the start of the next one. But not before it treats us to one more really special effect.
I'll show you something good before you die. Bad, isn't it?
Thanks, Ling. Couldn't have said it better myself. At the end of the day, Full Metal Alchemist: The Revenge of Scar is just a really fucking bad movie, you guys. It does make some improvements over its predecessor, like the wigs are way less community theater now, for example, but they are nowhere near enough to save it from its single greatest flaw, which is that it's just plain fucking boring. The last movie I could maybe see someone enjoying with a drunk enough group of friends, but unless you have insomnia and the melatonin stopped working, avoid this one at all costs. I'm Geoff Thew, professional alchemist, resurrecting my mom in her basement.